Okay, good evening. Well, it's nearly evening. It's getting later in the day. I usually do these video clips in the morning, but it's actually the afternoon, late afternoon now. So as the sun is starting to go down, and the python has just disappeared. Old Sid was out just now. He's a huge one too. I think we're talking, if not a couple of meters, maybe heading on towards the 3 there. Okay, so this is going to be a series of videos specifically talking about men's health. So it's Men's Health Week drawing up very soon. So not next week, but the week after in Australia. Around the world, I think, isn't it? So I think it's very poignant and especially necessary to hone in on certain aspects of men's health that are quite important to note, to delineate at least. So what we're talking about here, we're talking about men, of course, and we're talking about health. Now, is men's health any different from women's health? Is the male health different from the female health? Well, really, as far as health goes, in the understanding of health and the way, personally, me as a therapist that's, I guess, a little bit unconventional, I don't perceive health as having an opposite. As soon as I do, I tend to treat quite mechanically, and that has its place, of course. Let's not forget that. So if I do tend to feel that it's important to see health as having an opposite, then I will entrain myself or help myself to become more entrained along the mechanical sort of protocols of realizing that this area is not got as much range of motion as the other side, or this particular limb is tense whereas the other limb isn't, and so on and so on. But health, in the way it's perceived as not having an opposite, is an interesting perspective from this point of view, which I'll share now. Health, if it is sensed as something we all inherently have, from the embryo to the coffin, we are endowed with this vitality, this expression of physiologic wholeness. And when it's running at its optimum, then it is running as a vibration through, let's say, through the body, but it is the body. It's the expression of the body itself. However, when health becomes stagnant or stymied or staccato, or it becomes stuck, then that is the perspective that I usually take, that other people would take to be non-health. So I'm saying here that it's stuck health or stymied health. It's not what I'm perceiving as not health. The health is still there, it's just become stuck. Now let's put this into perspective by using the survival Fs. Now what are we talking about when we're talking about the survival Fs? There's a number of Fs that come in as the first letter to the description of a word, or the starting point of a word, that will describe a particular survival response within the body. Now let's start with the very first one. The first one from the crescendo of the Fs would be friend. So my survival response in modern day society to relate to other people is to have a persona and radiance of friendship, of befriending. And that tends to be something that is very useful to get a reciprocal friending from another person, from other people, from groups, or within groups. When we are, there's the factual friendship and there is the fictional friendship. And I will talk about that in a little bit more detail later. The next F is the fight. Everybody's heard of the fights. The fights, as in the fight flights. The fights is where we're needing to survive by overcoming a particular dangerous creature or a dangerous situation, and we're using that strengthfulness to fight the object, the thing, the creature, and be the upper hand, able to actually pass on our genes, pass on our vitality to the rest of the tribe. So we haven't died, in other words, we survived through that fighting. There's also a fictional fighting and a factual fighting, which again I'll explain in just a little while. The next F is the flight. So if the fight hasn't worked, or it's deemed not possible to fight this particular thing, and when I say an object, when we actually are in a situation where we're having to really struggle to lift a rock off of us, or to really fight a circumstance, or to be in the best position to overcome a particular obstacle, that again is an inanimate object, but it will come from the survival response of overcoming an animate object. So in this case, a saber-toothed tiger, I guess, from a prehistoric perspective. The flight would be where I'm going to run away, escape, get away from this particular creature, or obviously if it's an object such as an avalanche, I'll be running away as well. So that's the next F. The F's after that are not often so understood. So the next survival response would not be using the same nervous system arousal as the other three. Well, the other two, especially the fight flight, will be using a particular nervous system arousal. The first one, again, I'll explain that later, is a little bit different. That's the kind of human uniqueness, the friending that we're able to do. Perhaps dolphins can do it too, perhaps many mammals can, but humans especially have an ability that physiologically is quite researchable and proven, that we actually have a very big ventral vagus nerve which enables us to actually befriend things quite easily. Talk about that later. The next F is the freeze. The freeze response, like the deer in the headlamps as you're approaching it. It freezes, doesn't it? It seems like a dumb thing to do, but not a dumb thing at all. If you are a deer in the forest and there's the scent of a wolf pack enclosing or getting close to you, you will freeze in order to become totally immobile. Immobilized to the point that nothing can see you. Now that's not just the physical silhouette and stature that becomes immobilized. It's also your intestinal digestion stops. There's no need for it to continue. The slightest gurgle could give your position away to the wolves. You're not even going to be emitting any pheromones. Your scent glands will even start to just shut off. Again, you don't want to be smelt by the wolves. In other words, your system has pretty much just gone into rigor mortis and it's shut down. It's shut down, but the mind is still going. There's a tension through the body. It's just totally immobile. All the joints have been told to just hold it. Whoa boy, no more. But the mind is going round and round and round. The cognitive mind, that is, going round and round and round to just see what options there are. If the wolf pack gets too close, can I actually make this maneuver? Can I start to dart in this direction or that direction? If I am an animal that can climb up a tree, can I climb up that tree? And so on and so on. So the freeze response, a very important response for immobilizing, but also being completely alert as to different options of what can take place. The next F, possibly a more dangerous F if it's sustained for too long, is the flop response. The flop response is the feigning death, playing possum, the really not seeming as if you're even alive anymore. So if the wolf pack has come to the point whereby they can actually see you, so this is a deer just here. That deer that is feigning death possibly won't be eaten. It could be that the wolf pack isn't hungry. They don't like to eat dead carrion. Their evolutionary sort of progression has built up an aversion towards eating things that are dead, because they know, or rather they have the instinct to realize that eating dead things can sometimes prove either fatal or at least cause the organism to get ill due to the dead being, having been there for a while and built up lots of bacteria and various not very edible tissues. That's the flop response, and that's not a very useful thing to be in for a long period of time, but a very useful thing if it enables that wolf pack to go on past. And it can be sometimes that an animal that is reacting, restraining, entices the predator to actually carry on with the fight, even though it's not hungry. It carries on wanting to, like the cat and the mouse. The cat just plays about with the mouse after a while, doesn't it? It plays about with it because there's a little bit of reaction, and it just wants to test itself. So to be completely floppy and completely immobile possibly won't entice that stimulus within the predator to carry on playing or reacting to the reaction. The next F, and it's kind of like the final F, is I just call it this, is the fairies. So going off with the fairies in that flop response. Now there is no activation whatsoever apart from the endorphins, enkephalins that are pumping through the system, causing the mind to be actually quite blissful. So if the wolf pack or hyena pack or whatever pack or tiger or lion has come up to you and you've gone through all of those responses, you're in the flop response and you have a load of endorphins pumping through and it is hungry, then as you're getting chewed up, you're not actually going to feel anything but the blissful sensations of the endorphin response. Nature's been very kind from that perspective. Now, it could be that the lion, the tiger, the wolf pack is a little bit hungry, and then you start to chew, and then it's not really my taste. And the fact that there's been no reaction, they start to go away, and you're left able to survive because this endorphin response is not suddenly causing the whole body to be in absolute agony and therefore build up a fight-flight response again and start to pump around the blood. It stays in that relaxed state, and therefore the blood doesn't suddenly start to gush out. And hopefully, there's a time for the clotting factors to come in, or for you to be to go off to the hospital, maybe. In day-to-day modern society, that's a very useful thing. Okay, so they're the Fs. They're the survival Fs. Now we were talking about the fictional and the factual, or the factual and the fictional. Let's put it that way around. So let's go back to the top F, the first F, which is the friend. The friend survival response. So I'm saying it's a survival response because, for example, through a scenario of someone coming into a room with a let's think about the riots over in America at the moment. I won't think about it for too long, but you see someone with a baseball bat come into the room. The first thing, as a survival response, that hopefully someone will do is to say, "Hey, it's okay, man. There's no trouble here. Let's calm it down. Hey, what's the problem? You're all right, man. Do you need something?" Obviously, that is probably a futile response in that, the person's just come in the room with a baseball bat. But perhaps it will work, and it hasn't expended any energy other than being cordial and nice and kind. And of course, if that doesn't work, then maybe we're feeling up to it. Maybe we actually don't mind taking a beat round the head with a bat, and we can restrain the guy, and that is the fight response. So going back to the original one, the friend response, that is a factual situation with the man with the baseball bat, or the woman with the baseball bat, or whoever with a baseball bat. That's a factual situation that you're attending to. The fictional situation, which you're also attending to, is when the mind has projected the need for this friending situation. So you're seeing a person in front of you who is, just going about their day-to-day affairs, and you're looking at them and thinking that there is a need to make a friendship here. So you're putting out that survival response for befriending, and you are overly friendly. You put on the salesman's smile. You start to act in a very inauthentic manner. These sort of things will build from the fictional point of view, will build up a tension within your own body because they're forming a conflict. The reality does not need this sort of over friendliness. It could be that the person in front of you is being very unfriendly, and your ability to calm down the situation with the friendship is not working, and you're not letting it go into a fight situation or a flight situation, and you're staying with the friendliness. And of course, again, that is inauthentic. It's a toughie. It's a tough one. The friendship is only appropriate in the situations that, in a survival situation, whereby really it does calm down a situation, or it enables cordiality, relational interactions that are reciprocal. If it doesn't work, we want to be making sure we're authentic with the other F's, or notice that we're actually starting to suppress things. If we're suppressing something, notice it through the sense of a tension building up in the body, a sense of a sensation which is odd or unique or not usual. Sense it somewhere in your bodies, maybe your hands, maybe the area around your chest. You might feel it down in your belly. You might feel it in your feet. Wherever it is, notice it, because later in the day or after the situation has dissipated and you're on your own, or you're in a space that you are with real friends or a real cordial environment, then you can re-access the area that is stored or suppressed that conflict. This is very useful, and it will provide a longevity to your physiologic access to health. If you are not able to re-access that suppression will become like a knot, Gordian knot, a knot which is cyclical, viciously cyclical, a pattern of experience that lays sometimes dormant, sometimes bubbling in the background of the physiology. This is either cyclical health or stuck health. It's not expressive health. It's not health that is providing the optimal relevance of the physiology or for the physiology. The next F, the factual fight, would be when there's a real fight that one has to attend to. The fictional fight is where I am again suppressing that wish to actually fight the intruder, that wish to fight the person who's really just peed me off, the wish to really let my voice be known in this situation. We're suppressing it. So the fight, when it is coming out as an emotion, is like anger, isn't it? Like rage, like discontentedness voiced. If we suppress that, again, the tension can be more intense. The area of consolidation and conflict can be more intense. Again, stored within the body. So if we're feeling any of those intense reactions taking place through that suppression, notice them in the body and then re-access them later on. At some particular point, when you have an environment which is conducive to your internalizing, to coming back to the sense of your body, please do it. Very, very relevant and useful thing to do. The flights, rather than it being anger or rage or just that feeling of intense discontentedness, now we've got this feeling of fear, this fear of I need to get away. And the factual one is that there really is a creature running after me. I need to get the hell out of here. The fictional one is when I am projecting this person as, or this thing or this creature as being dangerous and something I need to get away from, and something that's going to cause me harm, something that's not going to do this organism any good whatsoever. I'm projecting that. I'm putting it onto that other person. I'm repeating it. It's something that I've got this metaphoric saber-toothed tiger in my head. I've got this metaphoric sort of circumstance or experience running around in my head. That's the fictional one. So we've kind of projected it. We put it onto the projector screen of our mind, and we've said, you know, this is a reality, or rather the mind has projected it onto the body pretty much, saying this is a reality when it's actually not. Again, this is going to cause discontent. You can say the fight and the flight would be like both together will be an aversion. You have an aversion towards this creature and you want to pin it down. You have an aversion towards this person who is actually shouting at you and you want to fight them. Or you have an aversion towards this creature or person and you want to get away from them. So that's the aversion part. The freeze. Now, what's happening with that freeze? The freeze is where the body can really start to turn a little bit pear-shaped, because it can be quite hard to know that there is a sensation there that needs to be reaccessed later on. When there is a factual freeze, we freeze for a certain amount of time, and then after the creature, the object, the person is gone, we start to tremor it back out. We start to rejig and hyperventilate the physiology that needs to reinstitute itself back into the present environment, present state environment. I think it was MUSH, wasn't it? The series back in the 60s, 70s, I think, about the Korean War, when they were the medics treating the wounded in the wartime, the Americans anyway. And they would come in, they said, there was a saying that came from MUSH, saying that how they come in to the operating theatre is how they go out. So in other words, if they came in an extremely tense situation like that, they would come out tense. If they would come in all relaxed and calm, they would come out calm. In this situation, in the freeze, as you start to come out of it, you will come out exactly the same way as you came in. In other words, that fight, flight, adrenalized response that you had initially just before you went into the freeze, you would come out like that. And it's not a bad thing. So if the freeze is fictional, if it's a fictional freeze, then we're freezing in every circumstance that we feel is a reality when it's not. In other words, we get a tight shoulder when we're actually feeling that this person needs a bop on the head, and they actually don't deserve a bop on the head, but you're feeling that they do, and that fictional freeze will put attention into the shoulder because you're not wanting to do it. You're not wanting to do it. Something's stopping you from doing it because something knows that it's actually not real. And if we start to project this person as being bad, that instant being bad, or even deeper than that, the deep fictional freezes, or when we're just conjuring up something that happened in the past and I want to do something about it, and the frozen shoulder starts to come in. Or we freeze because we're really thinking that this is a dangerous situation, this memory that's suddenly arisen in my being, my system, is a reality when it's actually not. The experience is something that happened when I was 5 years old, but it's suddenly arisen again and I freeze. If it's tumultuously repeating itself in the background, of course someone's going to be in that constant freeze state. It might lock off the whole digestive system. It might be the pericardium around the heart just becomes very tight. It could be that the neck goes into that hyperextension position so we can look around for danger. Or the hip flexors become really tight. The genitals become retracted. You might find that the diaphragm becomes almost stuck, not able to descend in the usual way. Or we retain that breath and we don't ever let it go fully. This is the freeze response, and it's the fictional freeze response, because remember, if it's a factual freeze response, then afterwards, if we know the present state of the real unfolding environment, then the body will naturally release off that tremor, naturally release off that freeze through tremoring, or any just rejigging of the body. So the nervous system and the cellular systems can all sort of re-enhance their awareness of what is real and what isn't. And so the flop, the factual flop, as we say, is a real flop. You having to just play dead because this is a dangerous situation. If these animals come any closer to me, I'm going to get ripped to pieces. So I actually just need to pretend that I'm dead, and then they might just walk past. They might not even notice that I'm here. The fictional flop response is where, again, we're repeating the hyena pack scenario as metaphorically through our memory of things that have happened in the past, but it seems like they're happening now. So a memory of me being shouted at as a kid, cornered into a place whereby I just feel useless, worthless, and I just feel like I just want to be dead. So these people around me just go away. So I'm just ignored. So I'm not actually shouted at anymore. If that's repeated again and again and again, the memory, in other words, this is the fictional flop response. And of course, this can lead to very exhausted systems, very fatigued, and just not scintillating systems. The physiology is not sensing anything. It's numb. It's like you've lost your nervous system. There's nothing there. I'm feeling dead, chronically fatigued. You might find people who are very flexible, able to go into extreme acrobatic positions, sometimes almost seem hypermobile to the point whereby it seems almost abnormal. Sometimes, actually, it's more often than you think, these people are sometimes very flexible and yet they're not feeling their body. The flop response would be very flexible, would be able to move, but it's not feeling. Now, in that situation, it is important to reconfigure what reality is, to come out of that fictional flop response. And it usually does take another person, or maybe the interaction with the group, to actually help that to come forth. A therapeutic environment can be very useful for that. In fact, I would say it's probably the most useful thing. The fairies position, the fairies survival response. Well, there's obviously a factual one, which is where I really do have to just pump all these opioids around because this dangerous situation is unfolding right before me, and I want to be somewhere else. Thank you very much. I'm very happy having these natural physiologic sort of drugs pumping through my body, so I can actually be in the bliss realms. I'll be dancing with the divas. Great stuff. The fictional is when we're going into so-called meditational states. In this survival response, we'll call the fairies. So the mind has become so fixated upon this particular object, and the very, very background aspect of it is that it's an object that is separate from me. In the end, that opioid response will come up through the body, through the system, and you will feel fantastic. This is the I will say it, the mistake that we can get into based around dhyana. If we do get into a so-called meditational state like this, then you are going to come out exactly as you went in. Exactly, no different, no insight whatsoever. Be very careful with this. This is just a survival response, and it is even worse than that. It's a fictional survival response, because the factual one, you will realize that that was a wolf pack that just went past, and it was very needed for me to go into that survival response. And as I'm shaking and tremoring, all of this stored up patterning that's taken place through my body, then I realize what's going on. But if we're going into a so-called meditational state, and we're thinking, well, that was me just going off to another planet, that was me actually being with the angels from the Pleiades and all of that sort of stuff, not a very useful place to be. It's just not. And who knows, there might be a factual place whereby you can actually be really dancing with the divas. I'm not saying that isn't a reality, but don't get deluded by the fictional stuff. That was a long one, wasn't it? Okay, I'm not going to go over that anymore. That's just the precursor for some of the men's health vids that we're going to do later. And I will promise to bring in some of the stretches and the breath work and the neurogenic release, and also some of the, borderline going into, well, just talking about the pranayama. Pranayama. So the non-doing breath. And we'll even discuss the ice immersion. So at some particular point, we'll talk about the immersing into ice to let the primal physiology express itself, to get out of the way with all this fictional stuff. All the fictional stuff can go to this idea. This is a factual stuff. I am really in ice, and I am really starting to feel the hunting response come up through my body. What is the hunting response? We'll talk about that later. Okay.